Before the music, before the moonwalk, before the glittering glove became a symbol recognized around the world, there was one thing about Michael Jackson that no camera could fully explain: the way people reacted when he appeared. This was not ordinary fame. This was the kind of fame that made crowds collapse into emotion, made celebrities forget themselves, made fighters feel small, and made entire cities stop as if history had paused for one person. From Moscow to Munich, from Princess Diana to Mike Tyson, these moments prove that Michael Jackson was not just watched by the world. He changed the atmosphere wherever he went. Picture Moscow in the 1990s, a city standing in the middle of a historical transition, still carrying the weight of its past while slowly opening itself to a very different kind of future. Red Square is packed in broad daylight, the kind of daylight that makes every detail feel exposed and real. People are crowded along the streets, pressing forward, lifting their heads, trying to see past shoulders, barriers, and security. The atmosphere is already charged, but then something begins to shift. A motorcade appears and starts moving through the center of the city. At first, it is only a line of vehicles, but everyone knows who is inside. Michael Jackson is passing through Moscow. For a city that had seen political power, military parades, world leaders, and historic public gatherings, this was a completely different kind of spectacle. This was not the arrival of a politician or a diplomat. This was not a formal state moment. This was global pop culture entering Red Square like a wave. Michael Jackson was not just a singer riding through the city. He was one of the most recognizable human beings on Earth, a figure whose music, face, movements, clothes, and voice had traveled across countries long before he physically arrived there. People were not reacting to a normal celebrity. They were reacting to a living symbol, someone who seemed almost unreal because they had seen him on screens, posters, television broadcasts, and music videos for years. Then in the middle of the crowd, one woman spots the car. Maybe she sees Michael clearly. Maybe she only sees enough to believe he is there. But that is all it takes. In that instant, everything around her seems to stop making sense. The barriers are no longer important. The security guards are no longer important. The fact that this is a moving motorcade in the middle of a crowded public space does not seem to matter. She has something in her hands, and she becomes completely focused on one thing: getting it to Michael before the car moves away and the chance disappears forever. There is something chaotic about the way she pushes forward, but there is also something strangely innocent in it. She's not thinking like a person in a controlled public event. She is thinking like a fan who has suddenly been placed within touching distance of someone she never expected to see in real life. To everyone else, it might look reckless. To her, it probably feels like destiny narrowing down to a few seconds. She calls out to him, desperate to be seen, desperate to be heard, desperate to turn one impossible moment into something personal. The funniest part is not only that she manages to get close enough for Michael to notice her. It is what Michael thinks she is carrying. Someone near him points out that the woman has something for him, and Michael looks over, trying to understand what it is. From his angle, in the middle of all the movement and confusion, the object looks strange enough that he thinks it might be toilet paper. For a brief second, the entire scene becomes almost absurd. There is Michael Jackson, one of the biggest stars in the world, sitting inside a motorcade in Moscow, trying to figure out whether a woman in the street is handing him a gift or a roll of toilet paper. That small misunderstanding turns the moment into something hilarious and human. The woman is overwhelmed, shouting that she loves him, trying to pass him whatever she brought. Michael reacts with a mixture of surprise, amusement, politeness, and disbelief. He does not seem cold or irritated. He seems caught off guard in the most Michael Jackson way possible, gentle and confused, almost too polite for the chaos around him. The scene feels unplanned because it is unplanned. That is what makes it memorable. No public relations team could design that kind of moment. It happened because Michael Jackson's presence made ordinary people do extraordinary, irrational, emotional things. That scene in Moscow says more about the scale of his fame than any chart number ever could. His popularity did not need translation. It did not need explanation. The second people realized Michael Jackson was there, normal behavior began to fall apart. A street became a stage. A motorcade became a performance. A woman in a crowd became part of a story that people would still remember years later. Ale did not have to sing. He did not have to dance. He did not even have to step out of the car. His presence alone was enough to change the atmosphere around him. But Moscow was only one example. Russia was not the only place where people lost control in his presence. In Munich, Germany, during one of his performances, the energy inside the arena was already at a level most performers never experience. The lights were bright, the music was moving through the venue, and the crowd was screaming with the kind of intensity that only surrounded Michael Jackson at his peak. Every movement he made seemed to send shock waves through the audience. A turn of his head, a pause, a step, a gesture of his hand. everything mattered because the crowd was watching him like he was not just performing music, but creating an event in real time. Then something happened that made the night even more unforgettable. A fan managed to get close to the stage, but instead of immediately being stopped, security opened the barrier and allowed her through. It was the kind of decision that almost does not make sense when you think about the level of fame involved. This was Michael Jackson. Crowds around him were never normal. Reactions around him were never predictable. And yet, for a brief moment, that barrier opened, and a fan crossed the line between audience and dream. When she reached him, it did not feel like a normal concert interruption. It felt like a person walking straight into a fantasy she had carried for years. She got close to Michael and clung to the moment as if her entire body understood that this would never happen again. She was not calm. She was not controlled. She was overwhelmed by the reality of being beside someone who had probably existed in her imagination for most of her life. The music continued. The performance kept moving. Thousands of people watched as one person's private emotion unfolded in public. Michael stayed composed. That is what makes the scene even more striking. He had lived through this kind of hysteria for years, and yet he handled it with a strange calmness. He did not appear angry. He did not treat her like an enemy. He seemed to understand that she was not trying to harm him. She was simply overcome. She was standing beside a figure who, to her, may have represented childhood, hope, escape, music, and memory all at once. For the audience, it was a dramatic concert moment. For her, it was probably one of the most intense emotional experiences of her life. When security eventually tried to remove her, she resisted, not in a violent way, but in a deeply emotional way. She held on because letting go meant the dream was over. It meant returning to the crowd, returning to distance, returning to being one fan among thousands. For a few seconds, she had crossed into the impossible. She had stood beside Michael Jackson. She had touched the world she had only watched from far away. So when security pulled her back, the emotion on her face and in her body seemed to contain everything at once: joy, panic, disbelief, heartbreak, and desperation. That was the effect Michael Jackson had on people. He was not only a performer, he was woven into people's lives. His music played in their homes. His videos shaped their childhoods. His image appeared on television, magazines, posters, and stages across the world. People did not simply admire him from a distance, they carried him emotionally. So when they finally came close to him, they were not reacting to a stranger. They were reacting to years of feelings suddenly becoming real. Kevin Hart is known as one of the most confident men in entertainment. He is fast, loud, sharp, fearless, and almost impossible to embarrass. He can walk into a room and dominate it within seconds. He knows how to turn pressure into comedy, how to take awkwardness and control it, how to make himself the center of attention without looking uncomfortable. But even Kevin Hart had a moment where the Michael Jackson effect completely broke through his confidence. The clip, Kevin reacts as if he is standing in front of the real king of pop. His body language changes. His usual quick control slips for a moment. He looks stunned, excited, and completely caught off guard. It is the kind of reaction that makes him seem less like a famous comedian and more like a kid suddenly standing in front of someone he grew up idolizing. His confidence does not disappear because he is scared. It disappears because the image in front of him is too powerful. He is reacting before he can think. But the twist is what makes the moment so unbelievable. It was not Michael Jackson. It was an impersonator. Kevin Hart had absolutely no idea. That detail changes everything. If someone pretending to be Michael Jackson could create that level of shock in a man as bold and self-assured as Kevin Hart, then it becomes almost impossible to imagine what the real Michael did when he walked into a room. Michael's image had become larger than the person himself. The hat, the posture, the movements, the silhouette, the aura, those things were so deeply embedded in culture that even a convincing imitation could make grown celebrities lose their composure. That is not ordinary fame. Ordinary fame makes people notice you. Michael Jackson's fame made people malfunction. It turned confident entertainers into fans. It turned crowds into storms. It turned public spaces into emotional events. His image alone carried enough power to trigger reactions before people could even confirm whether it was truly him. Speaking of figures who seemed almost untouchable, in 1997, Michael Jackson came face to face with actual royalty when he was introduced to Princess Diana and Prince Charles at a concert in London. It was one of those rare moments where different kinds of global fame stood side by side. Michael Jackson, one of the most famous entertainers in history, was standing beside Princess Diana, one of the most photographed and beloved women in the world. Both of them knew what it meant to be watched constantly. Both knew what it meant to belong partly to the public. Both understood, in different ways, how strange it felt when your image became bigger than your private self. On the surface, the meeting looked formal and respectful. Michael appeared calm, honored, and careful with his words. When asked how it felt to meet royalty, he described it as exciting. When asked if he wanted to say something to his fans, he kept the response simple and said he was happy to be there. It was polite, brief, and controlled, exactly the kind of public exchange people expected from a moment involving royalty, cameras, and one of the biggest stars alive. But years later, Michael revealed that the most memorable part of that meeting happened away from the cameras. Before the show, he had removed Dirty Diana from the set list out of respect for Princess Diana. He did not want the title to create an awkward impression. The song was not about her, and Michael later explained that clearly. It was about a certain kind of woman who followed musicians and performers around concerts and clubs, a type of world he had seen throughout his life in entertainment. Still, because Diana would be there, he thought the respectful choice was to remove it. He did not want to embarrass her. He did not want anyone to misunderstand the moment. Then Diana surprised him. She pulled him aside and asked whether he was going to perform Dirty Diana. Michael told her no and explained that he had removed it because of her. Instead of being offended, she told him she wanted him to do it. She wanted to hear the song. That small exchange revealed something warm and charming about her. She understood the situation. She had a sense of humor. She did not treat the song title like a scandal. Michael had tried to protect her from embarrassment, but she turned the whole thing into a light, human, memorable moment. That conversation matters because it showed two public figures stepping out from behind their images for a second. To the world, they were icons, the King of Pop and the Princess of Wales. But in that private exchange, they were just two people sharing a joke about a song. Michael was careful and respectful. Diana was playful and relaxed. In a life surrounded by cameras, that small moment probably felt more real than the formal handshake everyone else saw. By the 1990s, Michael Jackson could not walk into a room without that room becoming an event. A restaurant visit could become chaos. A hotel entrance could become a crowd scene. A simple public appearance could turn into screaming, crying, cameras, and security problems. He lived inside a level of fame that made ordinary life nearly impossible. Most people move through the world without being noticed. Michael could barely move through the world at all without changing it. So he tried something different. He used disguises, not because he was vain, not because he wanted attention, not because he wanted to seem mysterious. He used disguises because he wanted something most people never appreciate until they imagine losing it, a normal day. He wanted to go somewhere without being watched. He wanted to exist without creating a reaction. He wanted to observe life without life immediately rearranging itself around him. Michael once explained that one of his dreams was to go into a supermarket and shop like everybody else. For most people, that sounds almost too simple to matter. Walking through aisles, picking up items, placing them in a basket, comparing products, waiting in line, these are ordinary things. For Michael, they represented freedom. They represented a world he had been separated from since childhood. Whenever he tried to do something normal as himself, people gathered around him. They wanted autographs, photographs, handshakes, conversations, proof that they had been near him. No one behaved normally once they realized it was Mike. Hail Jackson. That is why the disguise mattered. It gave him a temporary doorway into ordinary life. Even if the experience was arranged, even if it was not perfectly real, it allowed him to feel a version of what everyone else knew naturally. He could walk through a store. He could hold a basket. He could look at shelves. He could pretend for a few minutes that he was not one of the most famous people alive. But even that illusion was fragile. At one point, he started recognizing people around him. The woman in the blonde wig turned out to be his nanny. What was supposed to be a normal shopping experience was still surrounded by people connected to him. The scene became funny, but underneath the humor was something sadder. Even Michael's attempt at normal life had to be managed. Even his version of ordinary had to be created carefully, because real ordinary life was not safe or available to him. For Michael, something as basic as shopping felt thrilling because ordinary life had never truly belonged to him. He became a household name before he was even 10 years old. At an age when most children were riding bikes, playing outside, making friends, or wasting afternoons with no purpose at all, Michael was already working. He was performing on national television. He was recording music with the Jackson 5. He was rehearsing, traveling, singing, smiling, and being watched. His childhood was not private. It was scheduled and consumed by the public. That is why he loved disguises. They were not just costumes. They were one of the only ways he could see the world without changing it. Michael once explained that when people realized it was him, they changed. They stopped acting naturally. They became excited, nervous, emotional, or desperate for his attention. He did not get to see the real world because his presence transformed it. A disguise allowed him to sit quietly on a bench at Disneyland and watch people talk. It allowed him to observe families, conversations, laughter, small arguments, and ordinary human behavior. For most people, that would mean nothing. For Michael, it was rare access to reality. At the peak of his career, Mike Tyson was one of the most feared men on the planet. His name carried danger. He had destroyed opponents with terrifying speed and power. Fighters looked nervous before facing him. Crowds watched his matches, knowing the fight could end almost immediately. Tyson was not just a champion. He was intimidation in human form, yet even he had a Michael Jackson story that left him shaken. The first time Tyson met Michael was around 1989 in Cleveland, after one of Michael's concerts. Tyson was with Don King and they went to see the show. Afterward, Tyson found himself near a door where Michael was waiting for his car. The huge crowd was gone. The lights and stage were behind them. It was a quieter backstage moment, with only a few people moving around. Tyson, who was at the absolute height of his own fame, tried to get closer and speak to Michael. Then Michael turned around, looked at him, and asked where he knew him from. He asked if he knew him from somewhere. For Tyson, that question landed harder than anyone would expect. This was Mike Tyson, one of the most recognizable athletes alive, standing there like a nervous admirer, and Michael Jackson did not seem to know who he was. Tyson answered respectfully, saying he had come to the show and admired him. Then Michael turned around and got into the car. It was brief, casual, and devastating in the funniest possible way. Tyson later laughed about it, but the moment clearly stayed with him. There is something surreal about the image, the most feared fighter in the world being emotionally humbled by a soft-spoken pop star who casually failed to recognize him. Tyson was used to people fearing him, respecting him, and knowing exactly who he was. But in that moment, he was just another person hoping Michael Jackson would notice him. The funny thing is that Tyson and Michael had more in common than people usually realize. Both were connected through figures like Eddie Murphy and Don King. Both became rich and famous at a very young age. Both owned exotic animals. Tyson had tigers, while Michael had an entire zoo at Neverland. Both reached the highest level of fame in completely different worlds, and both later faced serious financial trouble. One came from boxing, aggression, discipline, and fear. The other came from music, dance, fantasy, and performance. But underneath the surface, their lives shared the same strange pattern: extraordinary talent, early fame, public obsession, massive wealth, and a private life that never had much chance to feel normal. Now take everything you have seen so far and imagine something even more personal. Imagine Michael Jackson not passing by in a car, not appearing on a stage, not standing across a room, but calling your phone. Imagine hearing that voice directly, knowing that one of the most famous people in history is speaking to you. That is exactly what happened to Zac Efron when he was still a young actor beginning to make his name through High School Musical. Zac was with director Kenny Ortega when Kenny received a call. Kenny looked at him in a way that suggested something unusual was happening, then offered him the phone. Zac did not understand what was going on. Then Kenny told him it was Michael Jackson. In that instant, the room must have felt different. There are names people hear and react to, and then there are names that seem impossible to process in real life. Michael Jackson was one of those names. When Zac took the phone, Michael asked who was speaking. Zac, completely overwhelmed, introduced himself. He told Michael he was a massive fan, that he was an actor, and that Michael was his hero. He could barely find the words because there was no normal way to handle that situation. What do you say when someone you grew up admiring is suddenly on the other end of the phone? At first, Michael simply thanked him and asked to speak to Kenny again. For a moment, it seemed like the call might end almost as quickly as it began. But then Kenny explained that this was Zac from High School Musical. That changed everything. Michael came back to the conversation and told Zac that he loved what he did and that he was a huge fan. Zac completely lost control of the moment. He lost his balance, nearly fell into a wall, and could not process the idea that Michael Jackson knew who he was. The two of them became emotional on the phone. Both were crying. Both were caught in a rare kind of moment where admiration moved in both directions. Zac admired Michael as a legend, as a hero, as someone who had shaped entertainment itself. Michael, in turn, recognized Zac as part of a new generation of performers reaching young audiences in a powerful way. For Zac, it was not just a compliment. It was almost impossible validation from someone he considered untouchable. Then Michael ended the conversation with a line Zac never forgot. He told him, in essence, that dreams really do come true. From anyone else, that might have sounded simple or sentimental. From Michael Jackson, it carried a different weight. It sounded like it came from someone who had lived inside the impossible his entire life, someone who knew both the wonder and the burden of dreams becoming real. For Zac, that sentence stayed with him because it was not just advice. It was Michael Jackson acknowledging the strange magic of a dream becoming reality. That phone call also says a lot about who Michael was away from the stage. Beneath the costumes, the choreography, the screaming crowds, and the global image, there was someone deeply attached to wonder, childhood, animals, fantasy, and innocence. He seemed constantly drawn toward the childhood he never fully had. He owned chimpanzees, giraffes, elephants, and a Bengal tiger. That same emotional impulse led him to build Neverland Ranch, a massive property in California with its own amusement park, petting zoo, and private cinema. To outsiders, Neverland looked excessive. Some people saw it as strange, others saw it as a symbol of wealth. But to Michael, it seemed much more personal than that. Neverland was not just a mansion. It was not just a display of success. It was a world built by someone who had spent his childhood working while other children were simply growing up. It was a place where fantasy, play, animals, rides, movies, music, and escape all existed together. It was the physical version of something Michael seemed to be searching for his entire life, the freedom to be a child without being watched, judged, or controlled. The rides, the animals, the theater, the open space, the fantasy of it all came from the same emotional place as the disguises in the supermarket dream. Michael was always trying to reach something ordinary fame had taken from him. He wanted to experience the real world, but his fame made that nearly impossible. He wanted childhood, but work had taken much of it away. He wanted privacy, but the public wanted access to every part of him. So he built his own world, even if that world could never fully replace the one he had lost. From a woman chasing his motorcade through Moscow, to a fan clinging to him on stage in Munich, to Kevin Hart being fooled and shaken by an impersonator, to Princess Diana joking with him about a song, to Mike Tyson being humbled by one casual question, to Zac Efron receiving a phone call that stayed with him forever, every story points to the same truth. Michael Jackson did not simply enter rooms. He changed the emotional temperature inside them. He altered the behavior of everyone around him. Crowds became louder, celebrities became fans, fighters became nervous, royal meetings became personal memories, ordinary places became legendary scenes. He did not need a public relations team to manufacture these moments. They happened naturally because of what he represented. He was fame, talent, mystery, childhood, spectacle, loneliness, fantasy, and global recognition all wrapped into one person. People reacted to him not only because he was famous, but because he had become part of their emotional history. His songs had played during their childhoods. His performances had shaped what they thought was possible. His image had become fixed in their memories before they ever stood near him. That is why the reactions were so intense. Michael Jackson was not just seen, he was felt. His presence carried years of music, memories, admiration, curiosity, and myth. The world seemed to rearrange itself around him. Even silence around him could feel dramatic. Even a misunderstanding could become unforgettable. Even an impersonator could trigger chaos. There have been many stars, many performers, and many famous people, but there will never be another Michael Jackson. So the real question is this: who had the most unbelievable reaction to him? Drop your answer in the comments, because we read all of them. Michael Jackson did not just perform for the world, he changed how people behaved when they came near him. So now the question is, which reaction was the most unbelievable? The Moscow fan, the Munich fan, Kevin Hart, Princess Diana, Mike Tyson, or Zac Efron? Drop your answer in the comments, because we read every single one.